Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
And good afternoon. It is the 18th of July. There is incredible flooding going on in Europe, and it might be the fault of the moon. So apparently we are on the brink of another lunar wobble, which, as I understand it, is this like 30-year cycle that lasts about 20 years, and it's supposed to peak here about 2030. And so all of our coastal flooding is apparently going to get worse. But it's
it's going to get much worse.
But it just started. And so combined with all of the other crazy environmental chaos that's happening, storms on the West Coast, or actually in Canada again, but storms on the West Coast that are pumping so much soot into the air that it's creating soot thunderstorms and lightning, which starts more fires. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And so with the example of, failing infrastructure in the United States, we're also seeing places all over Europe that are flooding right now. And it's interesting. We're a couple months ahead of their wet season. It starts around October, apparently. Like late September and October is when the European wet season begins, and it goes on through, March or April, just like our spring does, but it hasn't even started raining yet.
Yeah. Well, this is obviously a crazy year for weather, so it's going to be, we're not even in the middle of the season yet. So I'm just, between the moon wobble and the general climate change that is, I'm just wondering, I don't know if you saw, there was a lady who lives in Germany saying, we didn't anticipate floods like this happening in Germany. You imagine it in poor countries, and it's like, the shit that poor or that rich quote unquote countries thought that they were immune from. Yeah, the moon wobble don't give a fuck how much you paid for your plot of land, and
the moon wobble doesn't care how much you make or pay in taxes. The moon don't give a fuck.
Yeah. So I'm looking at all of these people who thought that they could live on the coast and pay millions of dollars to get around the environmental the way that the environment chips away at unnatural structures. Like, I'm looking at a lot of these buildings and cities where there's no green. I think one of the hallmarks of cyberpunk dystopian landscapes is the lack of green and the lack of nature.
Oh yeah.
And the more I look at a lot of these American cities, the closer it gets to that aesthetic and design. And it's no wonder that they're sinkholes just popping up, buildings just falling down, because when you see the way they're planning it, it's like they're actively trying to exclude nature from their planning. And then 50 years later, 40 years later, even, nature's like, yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to take this down because this was poorly planned. Yeah. This tide, this thing you forgot about, that's like a natural movement of liquid. Yeah, I'm going to take down these buildings just slightly shifting the tide a little bit. And the way that nature is ignored in these infrastructural plans, it's I mean, it would be funny if people weren't dying because of it, but I can't even think of the proper word, in the sense of it's so disconnected from realities. People think that you can just buy the capacity to overcome a hurricane or something. Like, yeah, if I pay enough money, I'll have all the solutions.
Well, I think it was like last week or last weekend or something. Vegas hit like 130 degrees, and it's one of the highest. We're not even in August yet.
Yeah,
man, and like I think between Oregon and British Columbia, there's like and in Washington, there's like 1,000 people have died from heat related stress just in the last month. It's clearly it's the result of concrete jungles with minimal to no green space. But when we're talking about places like Oregon or Washington, where there's a lot of, those are deciduous rainforests, and when it still manages to get so hot in those regions, and they're on the coast, and they're on the coast of the Pacific, which is like a naturally cold body of water. There's a lot going on that we're just not considering. Well, some people are, but the general public just aren't considering. I remember when I was in like the 3rd grade, and it was a El Nino year, and then a few years later it was a La Nina, global the cooling and the warming of the waters off the western coast of the Americas. Mm-hmm. And this was a really big important thing once it had been identified that there was this heat warming and cooling cycle, because it helped to put the spotlight on some more complex interactions, ecological interaction, environmental interaction. And here in Indiana, there's like zero talk of El Nino or La Nina. And so it almost felt like it was only a concern on the West Coast, but I know that it has a profound impact on climate and just temperatures in general. I think people. Oh yeah. I don't think a lot of people realize that our oceans and our atmosphere are the same body of chemicals and fluids. It's just different parts of the natural state of a liquid or a gas. And these things they're all interacting with each other, like in a very complex way.
The way they're presented weather, it's as if, Ohio weather is just Ohio's weather. As if the rain or sunshine that happens in Ohio isn't relative to the Gulf Stream or what's happening on the Atlantic coast. Americans are actively taught to segment the way they understand the weather system, to the point that it's like they only even think about what's happening in their city at any given moment concerning the weather, because that's how they are given that information as a framework. It's like, even though it's coming from Associated Press or a consolidated source, the way that it's then compartmentalized to make people feel individualized, it makes it seem like, oh yeah, Bloomington, Indiana, Monroe County, your weather is somehow different than Marion County, Indianapolis. Our weather stations are different, and thus our weather systems are different. And that's the resulting mindset of Americans, in like, Ellettsville's down the road. Well, Ellettsville's weather is different than Bloomington weather, so I'm gonna live in Bloomington for the Bloomington weather because Ellettsville weather sucks. Like,
man, there have been so many times where the weather, weather.com, I guess, they say it's going to rain, and you know it does rain in town, but for whatever reason the storm like completely ignores my house. And so I'm sitting here like waiting for the rain. You know, all the doors are shut, the animals are in, it's dark out, it's windy, it's real nasty. And then I get a call from like my dad. It's like, hey, is your power out? Sometimes I call him and ask that, but he's like, nope, it's not even raining. But then there are times when it rains here and it doesn't even rain in town. So
right, yeah, we're on different systems because
yeah.
you know what I'm noticing is there's like a pocket where if a storm gets stuck in that pocket, then it goes up into the upper atmosphere and builds up and then comes back around midnight. Whereas if it goes into another stream, then it goes through town and goes like somewhere else. There's multiple ones because then, you know, sometimes they'll come from a different direction altogether and then come back. So
yeah, well that's like I think that plays into the whole like varying levels of atmospheric lakes and rivers that are happening at different altitudes, and some of them are really have a lot of activity and some are slow, but every so often they'll like their waterfalls will all align with each other and it just dumps incredible amounts of water.
It's funny you bring those up because I remember hearing the term atmospheric river years ago and being like, what the fuck is that? And then over time, you start to have the capacity to see rain in the sense of where the line of rain is in the distance because you've seen it so many times. Like, oh, that's where the line of rain hits. But then after years and decades of observation, then you start to see, oh, it's raining in the atmosphere, but not on the ground. Yep. And then there's these, you know, atmospheric rainfall or rivers or waterfalls in the sense of sometimes the weather system that's happening in the upper atmosphere or ionosphere or troposphere or whatever
but
is
it's
not
really
the same
hot
as what's
on the
happening
ground,
on the ground.
and it's not interacting with the ground in the way that one might presume. The other day when it was raining really hard, I looked out the window and there was a column or a wall of water in my neighbor's yard, and it wasn't quite raining on my trees yet. And I watched it just slowly move. Well, it wasn't very slow. It was actually like, you know, a pretty quick pace, but I watched it move and just drench everything. And it was pretty impressive. Like I've only seen a wall of rain a couple times like move right at me. I've usually just it ends up raining and I just notice it then, or it sprinkles gently and kind of eases in. But this was a wall. Like somebody turned on one of those moving sprinkler things and it was just coming right at me. It was actually really pretty. Like the things that nature does that in its strange capacity to balance or attempt to balance itself.
Well, there's you know, one of the recent storms when it flooded, I think the winds were must have been 40 miles an hour. There was a time when they started switching directions every 10 seconds.
Oh yeah.
At 40 miles an hour. I'm like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. It felt like I can only describe it as if I was at the bottom of a giant bathtub that was draining and
just getting pulled around by that vortex.
Yeah, well, and because you could see it was like a pendulum of wind where the trees would stop, the leaves on the trees would stop moving, and then they would blow the other direction, and then they would stop, and then it would blow the other direction. And it was like, what the fuck am I even looking at? Because I've never seen anything like that before. A pendulum of wind?
Yeah.
What the fuck do you even call that? Like
terrifying.
Yeah, it was terrifying. It was super because it felt like, oh shit, this must be how tornadoes start, in the sense of when the wind starts pendulously swinging back and forth, and then it swings too high in one direction and then keeps going in that direction. And that's where I'm like, it felt like the kickstart of a tornado, but I was at the bottom of, like, it was as if I was watching how tornadoes form at the as if they form in a specific spot every single time, where
I think
everybody's like, why do trailer parks get hit by tornadoes more often than not? And I'm like looking at the way trailer parks are set up. They're often built on plain areas. They're built along
flat
highways. It's very flat, but they're also built along like trade routes. So it's like if it's a highway or a street line or an electric line, there are natural land paths that these things get built along, and I think that the tornadoes follow these paths like a river, like a flooded river.
Well, I think there's a combination of factors. I think our roads retain a lot of heat, and that interacts with cooler air, and it creates turbulence. And I think that just in the example of a trailer, of a mobile home, they're not exactly built like stick built or steel frame construction. They're they're made efficiently. I'll say it like that.
No, I mean they're made using cheap part, but and so they've got the fucking condo in Miami.
And they've got
apparently.
like minimal amounts of insulation. They've got. I always see ice forming on mobile homes in like at the seams, basically, because they don't have enough structure to build a lot of insulation into. And so I think that when you put a lot of buildings like that next to each other that all generate heat and are poor at retaining it, it creates a warm area. It creates a hot zone. I think that there's a lot of altitude and temperature that comes into it, because of, I think it was like 2 years into living in my house, it was big bad storm time, and I went to the front room and noticed that there was water coming into the sunroom. And so I ran and grabbed towels and turned off the computers and freaked out because there's water coming into this space that I've got electronics. And then the power went out, and I looked outside as the lightning did its thing, and I saw rain flying sideways and then pulling up. And I believe they call it a straight line wind when you have really, really potent wind moving horizontally with the ground or even back up, but there's no like tornado touchdown. It was incredibly powerful. And when you said pendulous wind, that's what it reminded me of, because the trees in the front yard were all swaying in one direction and then really rapidly just shifting back the other direction. And then storms are pretty crazy. Mm-hmm. We feel safe when we're inside of a stone or a brick steel building, and most of the time we feel safe inside of a house. But like hurricanes and tornadoes, those things move buildings. They move ships.
I blame the Three Little Pigs story for the false sense of security.
Yeah, like the big bad wolf had a tornado gust power of huffing and puffing.
Tore that shit. If we would have had accurate representation, if this dude was blowing down houses in the first place, we need a tornado bad wolf that pour down the fucking brick so kids are like understanding. Yeah, guess what? You need a really strong building in order to be protected from tornadoes and hurricanes. And that shit, when you're trying to profit off the materials, that shit ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I remember seeing my first year in Indiana. It was like my first tornado drill. Even I remember I was talking to the science teacher, and he told me about how, it'll throw a piece of straw, like a piece of hay or grass, and it'll shoot that little blade of grass or straw like several hundred miles an hour, and they find these things embedded in the sides of buildings. Mm-hmm. And a straw could kill somebody. Yep. Yep. Like we don't think about the tiny piece of debris, the tiny pieces of debris or broken glass, because there's some idiots who live around this town who just break glass because they're not going to stay here. They don't live here. They just go to school here. But that stuff gets picked up and thrown around too. Mm-hmm. No one wants to be sandblasted by sharp beer bottle remnants. That's just like.
No, it's like You think about, the tree falling down is the big, but yeah, the debris and splinters are, if not more deadly, because there's so much more of them.
Yeah. Like whenever there's like, big time tornado devastation in the bread box in the Plain States, it always looks like a housing development construction site that just got plowed over, because it's just raw timber or just wood, and you can't really see like human stuff. You see a car crushed by some wood, but it's almost all just debris. And some of that stuff had to have been like transplanted. They find cars in trees. If a fucking gust of wind can pick up a car and put it in a tree, I mean, that's just monumental force.
Or the way that the floodwaters were just picking up cars and moving them. Jesus. I mean, that shit happened in Bloomington because...
Yeah. I saw pictures of a car on one of those big posts that they installed to block the roads off. Somebody's car got put up on one of those things.
Jesus.
They're like 3 feet tall. That means the floodwater rose over 3 feet.
Yeah.
Enough to lift a car.
Well, I saw there was a car that was off the road and had gone into a light pole where the floodwater was moving so fast and carried it so far off the road that it caused the car to get into a wreck where the driver, there's no way the driver could have done it because the car was in such a place where you're like, you had to be going 20 miles an hour or, maybe 40, 50 miles an hour off a ramp to get the car there. So clearly the flood did this shit.
Well, in one German town, they had like a big bad flood in like 1939 or so, or 36. It's one of the two numbers. But they had a really serious flood, and they marked how high the floodwater got on this building. And it's like at the dock, or it's right on the river. And it was like a fancy riverside hotel, and they never thought, it'll never get this bad again. This was a fluke, it was an accident, right? And then so this time around, the floodwaters got up to the 3rd floor of a hotel. Like up the bank, past the lobby, up into the 2nd, and then into the 3rd floor. Like, that's just nuts.
Well, you reminded me, we went to New Orleans, and the hotel we stayed in, I think it was on the 2nd floor where we stayed, maybe 3rd, but there was flood damage in the hotel room we stayed in that was clearly still from Katrina.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, holy fuck, I don't know how much the hotel room costs, but I'm like, surely, you can find a hotel with no flood damage, but probably not there.
So apparently there have been a lot of issues with the Tesla Energy solar shingles, solar panels. Mm-hmm. And there have been a few complaints, with rain damage and water damage and leaks. And so there's this one family I read about who's got a $580,000 home, and they bought the home and they had to buy the remainder of the lease for the Tesla system, and they've already spent like $100,000 repairing their roof. They're trying to go through arbitration with Tesla. Tesla's offered them $30,000, but their total right now is like $115,000. And so, Jesus. Yeah, you can't even buy peace of mind with electricity, generating your own electricity using somebody's leased product, because when it turns out that it was installed improperly, they won't even take care of it and all the damage that it causes. So here's the sticker of that what you reminded me of. That's a hotel that got flood damage, which means and it's in Louisiana, so it's like mold central. The house that had the failing Tesla system, it cost something like $40,000 for mold remediation, meaning people had to go in and scrub every surface, and they had to clean everything out, clean it out, not just kill the mold, but remove any spores that didn't get affected. And so, $40 grand for a house. We're talking like $500,000 for a hotel. And then they can't have the place open while they're doing this. They've got to get all that shit out so they don't make anyone sick. I mean, I think people died during the restoration, the post-Katrina restoration even. Jeez. Just from like shitty job sites and lack of resources, lack of safety equipment.
Good Lord.
Of course, the best
Cuba,
part about that is
Cuba.
Oh yeah, Cuba. Man, you know what? Wait, I gotta make sure that my numbers are right. Population of Cuba is 11 million people. Okay, so they got 1 million fucking people go march. That's 10% of their population. That'd be like if 30 million Americans went and protested at the Capitol. I don't think there's a stingray that's capable of handling that many cell phones. I know that DC is like one giant stingray, but I don't think that it's designed for 30 million people. If 10% of our population actually agreed on something and decided to protest at the same damn time, like in one place, like the Capitol, and bring everything to a halt there, oh man, there'd be widespread panic. I'm being really optimistic, like even just suggesting that 30 million Americans could organize to arrive at the same place on the same day. Oh God,
yeah, there's no way. What is our military, like 4 million, 5 million? Yeah, I don't. 30 million Americans, Jesus Christ.
There are 1.4 million active duty members, and oh man. 30 times the size of our standing military. Like the entire military, all of it.
The only thing you can get that many Americans to do at the same time is watch TV. And then you almost couldn't even do that. Like, oh, this show, I hate it. I'm going to watch something else. Just to spite it. I'll watch it later. I don't want to watch it while everyone else is watching.
Let's see. Well, 94 million people watched the Super Bowl, but wasn't it like 200 million people watched the Fortnite championship or whatever?
I wouldn't doubt it, yeah. So I know League of Legends passed.
Or maybe it was League of Legends.
But Fortnite's pretty popular too. Yeah, because they had over 19,000 fans attending at Fortnite, the world champion. Okay, let's see. Well, top 7 most watched esports events. Oh, yeah, like Fortnite's up there, but it's nowhere near League of Legends.
Yeah, League of Legends had 45.95 million peak concurrent viewers for their League of Legends World Championship Finals.
But I still think that's, if we're talking about NBA Finals, I think they may have passed NBA. Yeah, 20.8 or 20.38 for the finals. So this is where we're seeing
only
esports passing physical sports. And I think that's funny in that, on the one hand, yeah, it's more difficult to become a professional athlete than it is to become a doctor. But now we're going to be saying the same shit about esports. And it's probably going to be more lucrative to be an esports player because you're not going to get injured. The most injured you're going to get is fucking
RSI or carpal tunnel.
Yeah.
Well, what occurred to me is I remember reading about there was some issue with basketball games. We're trying to have basketball games in front of television screens with people zooming in, and that the players they just didn't have the energy of the crowd, and so at some point you got to wonder are they playing for the crowd or are they playing for themselves? Because I know that the person playing League of Legends or Fortnite is in it to own in whoever they're gonna kill. That's the nature.
Well, it's 100% for the crowd, because this is where, we can look at entertainment, and if there's no crowd, it's just a scrimmage.
Yeah, or an exhibition.
It's not an exhibition if there's no crowd. It's not. If there's no crowd, it's just a scrimmage.
Yeah.
Because the whole exhibit, and for an exhibit to it be an actual exhibit, you need people who are viewing the exhibit.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a display.
Yeah.
It's not a full an exhibit by definition needs people attending for it to actually become an exhibit. If there are no people in attendance, it's a failed exhibit.
But even the proxy of having people zooming in on screens wasn't sufficient to give them the energy motivation.
Yeah. Which, I think you see this represented in anime with the little electricity over, when people are staring down and the crowd's going wild, they do the little electricity charges or whatever.
Yeah.
As if, that was there decades ago. So now that we've seen the people without the crowd, but at the same time, I wonder if Japanese people would have the same problem competing because their crowds aren't Neanderthalic and in their expressions.
Well, didn't they did some UFC fights in the middle of pandemic, and those were fun to watch. Those still felt like UFC fights.
That's what. But I think every fighter was not as dependent on crowd energy, and some fought better without the crowds, and some fought worse. So I feel like if you need the crowd's energy to fight, that kind of makes you a sycophant, right? Or like a sociopath,
an incubus. No, that's not right. It's a vampire.
Oh, it's definitely an energy vampire, and that's what I mean. 100%. That's where. But then the people who are giving it are familiars, I guess, So there's always going to be those familiars that are take my blood, take my blood.
Yeah.
Fucking dumbasses. Yeah.
The people spent $7,000 to watch McGregor break his ankle in 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
Their blood is just
on that note,
paper,
okay,
cotton and money, blood.
I think there's a larger story happening with McGregor breaking his leg, and what has happened is the journalists dropped the ball on all these different stories, because if they actually picked up the ball and ran with it, they would lose their they wouldn't have anything to cover. So let's go back to Michael Bisping. Michael Bisping he came up through Ultimate Fighter, won the Ultimate Fighter, eventually, after many, many years, won a championship and ended up losing his championship in a fight to GSP, who had taken a 4-year sabbatical and came back to beat Michael Bisping in what appeared to be, one of the battles for the ages. Well, he had a fucking fake eye for the last few years of his competing. So this dude was able to get past the Nevada State Athletic Commission with a fucking fake eye, compete with the fake eye, and them not know anything about it until this dude actually comes out afterwards and says it to the public. Like, hey, guess what? I can pop out this eye because it's been fake for years.
What a great party trick.
Right.
Hey guys,
So
want to see something
that's
cool?
that's just one example. More recently, Khabib Nurmagomedov, last fight, Justin Gaethje goes in, just demolishes him. Well, we find out Khabib broke his foot during camp, and they didn't call off the fight. There's X-rays of the foot, so there was never any question. Well, it wasn't a quote-unquote excuse because he won. Well, that should have disqualified him from competing.
Yeah.
But we have three scenarios. Either the Nevada State Athletic Commission doesn't know because the doctor who clears the fighters does not give them information for whatever reason. Then the possibility that the Nevada State Athletic Commission does know, they let these people compete anyway, which is super fucked, definitely sketch, and has greater implications concerning betting lines. And then there's another scenario in which the UFC is actively paying them to look the other way. So there's three scenarios. None of them are good. None of them are good. So my problem is you have people who like don't want to acknowledge that Conor might have had a broken or a compromised limb going into this because it's like it sort of takes away from Dustin's win. I don't care about that. I don't give a shit about Conor having said that as excuses. I'm looking at this from the notion of
The game is flawed. The gaming system itself is rigged.
The system is flawed, and these people are okay. We know that these fighters don't get enough time to rest. We know that. It was like less than a year between the fucking first Poirier McGregor fight and this one. So you're telling me he got enough time to heal his bones from all the calf kicks, even from the first fight? No, so what I'm saying is when Anderson Silva broke his leg in that fight, it looked like a fluke because that shit had never really happened. It happened with Corey Hill before in the UFC. There had been like maybe one or two other leg breaks, maybe Edson Barbosa or some, I forget who else. There was a couple before Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva's leg breaks looks like a complete fucking fluke. Chris Weidman's leg break. Then it's like, is this karma? Because Chris Weidman had been not making fun of, but sort of leaning into the notion of, oh, the shin struck shin. He checked Anderson Silva's leg so hard he broke it. He'd been practicing that in camp. Well, that may be true, but shins don't just break like that. So Chris Weidman's leg breaks. Karmic fluke. Now, then we have McGregor's leg breaking within less than a year after that. And everybody's like, oh, it's another fluke. The third time is not a fucking fluke. There is something happening here. And there's only a few real scenarios that lead to this. The notion, you're telling me that this man's leg was in perfect condition. He goes in, throws super hard leg kicks, maybe compromises it after 10 leg kicks, and then 2 checks, breaks it like that? No. What I'm saying is McGregor, after his last loss, he probably went into his training camp, overtrained leg kicks, spam leg kicks. Oh, I'm gonna have the best calf kicks. Poirier ain't gonna be able to handle me calf kicks. He goes in there, trains calf kicks every fucking day for however many months, never takes a day off. I'm just gonna ice me calves. I'm gonna ice me shins. He's gonna taste it. And then he gets it in his head that he's going to go in and do the same shit. Meanwhile, he's chipping away at his fucking shins every day, creating microfractures microfractures every fucking day, never resting. Then the fight comes. He's all in his own head, high off his own ego, possibly also cocaine, goes in there, fucking spams leg kicks to prove a point because this dude is delusionally full of his own ego. So yeah, he probably would go in there and throw a bunch of leg kicks, then break his own shit because he never gave himself time to heal. Does that sound more plausible than this magical fucking, like, oh, he threw 10 leg kicks and then Dustin checked it twice, then his fucking shit broke? Which one sounds more plausible, man? Just Occam's razor. Which one? Like, you're telling me 10 calf kicks really hard. I'll give you that. Yeah, he threw 100%. Then 2 checks. That's going to cause that break, or him overtraining it, getting high on his own ego, spamming it, and then exacerbating the damage he had done through camp because his ego drove him to think that he could condition his shins the same way Dustin Poirier had conditioned his calves and shins in 6 months' time.
I'm going to go with option C. DP kicks fucking hard. Conor McGregor broke his ankle kicking training because he wanted to kick hard. And also Conor McGregor does not drink enough milk. I'm just gonna stick with that. Like, the guy needs to drink more milk. He needs to rest. Probably needs to get on some like Eastern, connective tissue bone restoration diet. I'm sure that it involves like eating a lot of fish with bone like cooked in the fish. You got to eat the bones too. But whatever it is that he needs to do if he wants to be a fighter again, like.
I mean, he's gonna have a titanium rod in there now, so
isn't that like an advantage?
No, because and this is like he's trying to talk like it is, but it still has to connect to bone.
Oh yeah, it's
tissue,
gonna be pinned in place. Oh, he's gonna kick something really hard, and it's gonna damage the pin sites, and it's
exactly. So the notion, if it were an advantage, people would just go get their shit replaced with titanium out the gate.
Yeah,
So of course it's not an advantage, but he's talking like it is because he's an idiot. He's high off his own ego. So this is again where I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe Conor didn't drink enough milk. What about Chris Weidman? What about Anderson Silva?
They probably didn't drink enough milk.
I mean, or
they just trained
at the end of their careers with brittle bones because they're at the end of their careers and it's years and years of kicking damage.
Yeah.
This shit didn't happen when they were 20. No. This shit didn't happen when they were 30. This happened later in their careers. So this is what I'm saying, like, there is an epidemic of people going past their points in their careers where they should and training way harder than they should, and then going into the octagon or cage or whatever the licensed or copywritten name of the fighting places.
The arena.
The smart cage for PFL.
What did the American Gladiators call their gladiatorial arena? American Gladiators Dome?
Forget. I think that might have been it. But yeah, everybody's got their own.
It was American Gladiator Arena.
Oh.
Dude, that was like the most hardcore shit. That was like Ninja Warrior before Ninja Warrior was like old enough to go to middle school.
Yeah.
They had an upside down track race.
But they also allowed their people to roid out of their fucking minds, which is like, yeah, that's fine because it's entertainment. It wasn't pretending to be a sport.
Yeah. It was a game show. They were playing a game. It's different.
Which now, and this is kind of this is the whole reason I'm saying this about the UFC, in that the way, if you look at the UFC and the way they advertise, it's getting closer and closer to WWE. They took the WWE narrative approach in the first place, but it's drifting closer and closer, where I'm like, if you're going to do that, just go full on embrace it. Yeah. But let's not pretend we're in this gap where your rankings matter. They're just arbitrarily coming up with these rankings, putting cans in the fight as if they're not putting cans in. So that's where I'm like,
I the thing I liked about American Gladiators is that even though it's a show, the fantasy is that some normal person off the street can compete in this game of strength and endurance and stamina and all that stuff with these like roided out superhumans. And I wouldn't mind seeing that in UFC as well. If they're going to go for the show, they might as well go all in and give us real serious I mean, they're already beating the crap out of each other. I'm not really sure how much more serious it can get, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, I don't know if you remember Bully Beatdown.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what that was. But then ever so often you'd get one of the bullies who was juiced out of his mind and he would end up winning.
Well, yeah, man, that's like we've talked about it with baseball. Like, I don't care if Mark McGwire was juiced, and like just put an asterisk next to his records. Just let us know who was on the juice, and that way we can see who really is doing the thing. Because I'd like to see I'm sure there's a human out there who can run faster than any person who is doing steroids. I'm sure that there's a human out there who's not using steroids and can do all these other things. But I also want to see the person who's, juicing, who can lift that power clean thing like that weighs more than, anyone else would normally try. I think I'm interested in seeing that at this point.
Mm-hmm.
As long as we keep record of who is doing these things and like under what conditions, like that's fine. That's what record keeping's for. I guess then we end up with like, champion, but they were, champion with asterisks is different than champion without asterisks.
Huh. I guess World's Strongest Man competition is supposed to be performance enhancing drug free. But yeah, a lot of them do. Yeah, because what's the name? The fucking Mountain admitted to it.
Yeah.
Like just straight up, which was where I'm like, yeah, duh. Duh. Yeah, thanks for confirming what we all knew, bro.
No, that guy's totally natural, dude.
Yeah. Like I get he's like, 7 foot or whatever, but yeah, 7 foot on steroids. Same shit with like Bob Sapp. I don't know if you remember him, but
yeah. Or The Rock. Like The Rock.
Exactly. Rock's he doesn't hide it though.
Yeah.
Because he's not competing in anything. He's just doing movies. So
yeah, he's being an actor.
He's just flexing on film. That's all.
Hey, that's cool. That's cool. The Rock's great. I want to see more of his movies.
Well, but then I can't take him seriously as an action star when he's just lifting all that. I'm like, dude, you wouldn't be able to fucking touch your like head, let alone fight.
But I think that's why it makes it so crazy, because he's like anime proportioned. He's like anime strongman proportioned, which is like pretty.
But he doesn't stretch.
Yeah,
and that's where you see people like Flex Wheeler doing the splits or Kai Green. And you're like, dude, Rock, what's wrong with you, man? Fucking do some yoga or some shit, bro. God damn, man. It's like, it like makes my back hurt watching him just walk around, flex, not able to move. Like, dude, stretch your arms, bro. Like, just take a minute and stretch, Rock, please. And I know he probably does. Otherwise, he'd be constantly cramped. But
see what?
Like, I seriously like. Go watch a Rock choreography scene, and you can tell that like the way he throws punches the same way he does from when he was wrestling. It's like you can tell he can only move his arms in a certain path. So then he has to like
throw the big haymakers all the time.
Well, it's not even a haymaker. He has to like the way he swings his feet is like comical. And the only reason I can say that is because like I have great form and I'm like, I would never fight The Rock. Just like, I wouldn't want to disrespect the person like that. But his like entertainment punches are like terrible form. And it's like, you can tell it's because he just can't move around it because he's been doing that same way for like 30 years, man.
Yeah.
And this is someone who grew up watching him in the Nation of Domination and shit.
Yeah.
So I'm not like hating on him.
No, man,
this
we
is
love
more
The
so
Rock.
like, yeah, the only reason I could even comment like this is because I grew up watching him perform. And this is also when he's like creating that like most electrifying man in sports entertainment persona. It was like 100% to antagonize racist white people. So that's why I will forever be like, yeah, The Rock gave a bunch of little black kids confidence to like not ever bend to racist, because that's what the fucking Nation of Domination was all about. And shout out to Vince McMahon for letting that storyline even happen, man. Because it's like Vince McMahon didn't have to let that shit happen. He didn't have to let The Rock be a fucking black champion who was like proud of his Samoan heritage, who was also the head of the Nation of Domination, just running shit. Just running shit. The Rock was running the WWE for like at least a few years because Vince was like, I'm going to let this man just run shit. Because he knows, like, Vince knew that he had a star, and if he just let The Rock do his thing, he would take the WWE to higher heights. And that's exactly what the fuck happened. That's exactly what the fuck happened, man. So this is where I'm like, you can like hate on the WWE for all these different reasons, but if you look at, okay, not to say,
I don't know Vince McMahon personally, but he makes a great foil and nemesis on TV.
Oh, for sure.
And once we acknowledge that WWE is a soap opera, he's a
100%.
fantastic antagonist. He's such a great antagonist that you can't help but hate him. But as you've pointed out, he helped foster the development of the Nation of Domination. He might actually be a cool guy.
Oh, fuck yeah. I know. There's no way he's racist. There's no way that Vince McMahon is racist. And in fact, he's probably an anti-racist that then plays this role and pretends to be all these things to undermine actual racist people. Because this is where I'm like, I'm sure he's probably said the N-word 100 times in his life at least. But I'm sure there's a point where he like started seeing people differently and became a different person and started using that like
The power of the platform.
And his past experiences in that like other mindset to then play a chameleon role. Because I can look at actual racist people and instantly, like, you don't have to say the N-word for me to know you're racist. I can tell how you fucking stand if a person's racist. The way they like their posture, I can tell a racist from their posture. Vince McMahon isn't racist. He used to be. He used to be very racist, but not when he was actually a black person's boss. Like, I think he had that shit out of his system by the time he was probably like 18 and probably understood that he was surrounded by this culture of white privilege where he could like, he could perpetuate it, or he could like use smoke and mirrors to tear it down. And that's exactly what he did, in the sense of like, you can do it openly or you can Trojan horse it. Vince McMahon Trojan horsed it.
He fucking helped create or helped elevate characters like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the coolest fucking dude. He was the Asian wrestler.
Fucking Rey Mysterio Jr.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Lucha Libre.
All the flyers. None of the flyers were white dudes until like what was it?
Flying Brian Pillman, I think. Well, that was he was like he didn't. Well, I don't know if he made it to WWE or not. I forget. But yeah,
I always liked watching the flyers. Those guys were great.
yeah, he did make it to the WWE. It was WWF, I guess.
Yeah,
Then, so.
from the third turnbuckle, and they go leaping off in the air, and of course the other person catches them, but then they make it look like they take him out with some big mighty chest blast. That shit was always crazy to me. All professional wrestling fighting moves were always so crazy to me because they didn't seem like, it's like, I mean, I guess that should work if you land it, but it seemed like it was all attacks and no defense. It was just all. It was like rams butting heads. I always liked it. I always thought it was great, but there always seemed like this, like they're just kind of going at it like nonstop. It's incredible.
Well, but that's where. Did you ever watch Japanese professional wrestling?
Oh, dude, that stuff's incredible.
Or like extreme wrestling, where like
they actually fuck each other up.
Like the barbed wire exploding ring matches and shit like that, where
the cage ladder matches and.
Yeah, it's like, somebody was getting hurt. Like somebody got hurt.
Yeah.
There's no way. There's obviously some choreography that happened, but these, the way the brutality of these matches, it's like somebody got hurt. There's no way somebody didn't actually get hurt in like almost all of these matches. And that's kind of where the ECW started trying to reproduce that level of brutality in America. And they brought over a bunch of, like Americans that have performed in Japan and some of the Japanese performers into America. But yeah, this is obviously, it's all opera, but when people don't understand the difference between acrobatic opera, there's Chinese acrobatic opera. That's way different than Italian bland ass fucking bullshit opera or French bullshit opera. Like French and Italian opera are so fucking boring, and they're like actively like shit sound in the sense of like it doesn't sound good. I hate the notion of romanticizing shit that's traditional and being like, oh, opera is so beautiful. Go to an opera. It fucking sucks. Like an Italian or a French opera. Yeah, I've done it multiple times. It sucks. It's a shitty experience. You'll probably fall asleep. The fucking music sucks. If you don't speak the language really well, you probably don't understand this shit. And then people go, oh, that was so beautiful. Fuck out of here. That shit sucks. I am tired of people acting like that shit is remotely like good because it's classic. And that's where I'm like, that's way different than like acrobatic opera, which is ultimately what we're getting with the
like Cirque du
WWE shit. Yeah. Or so yeah, Cirque du Soleil is like, it's the same shit, but
I feel like Cirque du Soleil has it owes a lot to Chinese opera, where they have people doing wire work and flying around, and I can't understand Chinese opera, like traditional Chinese opera. I don't know what they're saying at all. But the stories are they're so simple. It's like a moving cartoon comic strip or a comic book even. You can tell what's going on. The paint that they use to paint their faces tells it all. The action is so deliberate. Also, Eastern music is very different than Western music.
Yeah.
So it's like I feel like it's more of a backdrop for what's happening instead of the visual presentation being somehow bonded to or married to the sound itself.
Oh my god, I hate like Western opera sucks so bad. Oh, Jesus Christ. And that's where I'm like, I know somebody's like probably disappointed with that perspective. I don't fucking care, man. Like it sucks to me so bad where I'm like, it's the same shit with chamber music. Like, go try to dance to some chamber music. Good luck. Good luck, man. Like, oh, you're not dancing like somebody born in fucking 1535. Oh, okay. Yeah. Good luck. It's just so lame. People try to act like we need to revere that shit because it's old.
Well, I think it's important to understand.
And we can't talk shit about it.
Well, it's important to understand how to compose that kind of sound for like movie scores. For atmosphere in a movie?
Is it? And this is where I've been really like, I wonder if that notion of what we think associate with big screen scores has then stunted our capacity to like have outside of the box music scores, because then you go look at what's it called, Beverly Hills Cop 3. The music score in that is fucking atrocious. It's horrible.
I was actually going to say the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogy duo, whatever. Those movies have terrible, highly repetitive. And that's like
because
Hans Zimmer. You know,
dude,
that's like,
just imagine if they like, okay, this is a good
he just
point.
recycled all of the horse riding scenes music and just changed, like, modulated up a key or something.
But this is a perfect example of where Dynasty Warriors, the movie that went in line with the video game, stepped outside of the box, and they were having like 80s hardcore fucking guitar riffs while you're having these, action scenes set in fucking feudal China.
So I've got
the juxtaposition was amazing.
I've got to say this about all video game and anime and fighting, that kind of stuff. There is no other music than shredding guitar on the mountain, summoning the metal gods to claim your place, like among them, like riding the lightning and that kind of thing. There is no other music that is better suited to people engaged in combat. There just isn't. You could have like big heavy taiko drums and it's awesome, but as soon as you throw some like raging guitar on there, it's just drums.
That's why Taika Waititi's action sequence in the fucking Marvel universe with Immigrant Song is the only one anybody can remember by song.
Yep.
It's the only song that fucking stands out, because when you hear that bass, you know, it's like, that's the most iconic shit ever, because it power chord, fucking thumping bass line.
Well, then you got Robert Plant doing his wailing, and you just know it's about to happen.
Yeah,
it's coming.
So different than all these like, okay, big symphony, big timpanis, okay, I get it, yeah, rolling drums, okay, bringing the brass section, strings, okay, I guess cello, okay, got it. It's the same, like the way they have overused symphony music for big screens just to make you understand, oh, because this is a big screen production, we got a symphony, we got like 100-piece orchestra to make sure you know, and it all sounds the same. It all ends up sounding the fucking same now. So it's like, man, give me some rock or something. Good Lord.
There are some symphonies that they've gotten some flack because their like lead instrumentalists have been like found out to be using like meth so they could learn their pieces and be competitive in getting the parts. So there is rampant drug use in all theaters of music production and performance.
I mean, I don't understand why anybody would assume there wasn't.
I'm just thinking.
The notion, somebody like, I mean, not you, but some people were probably like, oh, these classical pianists don't do drugs. Like, yeah, good luck. They probably smoke more weed than anybody.
I think that there is an element of rock and roll, even within the conservatory. There's still an element that wants to break free. It's just those shackles are ingrained in, like, you know, the bedrock of Western music, and so it's really difficult for people to escape that and to unleash their inner rock.
Yeah,
I don't even think our culture of exceptionalism and stand out and, you know, let's be a badass and YOLO or whatever. I don't even think that can actually overcome the binding power of the conservatory. Because once it gets its hands on something, there are people who write conservatory or who do like classical Western composition, but they use rock and roll instrumentation or electronic music instrumentation, and it sounds so close, but it's just not. And that's not to say that, like, I mean, we've talked about how drum and bass is complex enough to be orchestral music, and it has been reproduced by orchestras, but you know, there aren't very many drummers who can actually play the drums like that, because it takes like 2 or 3 or 4 drum machines sometimes, and sampled drums to accomplish those things. And so it's just really, I don't know. I think that people want to rock. They want to, feel that kind of energy. But those secrets have been coded and locked away by the machine itself, by the music industry. Because how can you really bottle lightning or fire or ionizing radiation?
I think what ends up happening is you can't, but you can convince people you did before they realize you sold them a clone and a fake. That's what we end up getting with all these knockoffs of artists. The music industry will clone all their sounds until people realize, oh, this actually sucks. I don't like this fucking Bruno Mars ripoff or this.
I like
Adam
Bruno
Levine
Mars
ripoff.
for the first album of his that I listened to, but then
he just started doing 90s R&B ripoffs.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't need this again. I lived through it.
I don't need more Poison.
He's doing 90s drag, and that's when I'm like, yeah, I lived through it, bro. It looks like 90s drag to me.
We can blame their parents because they lived through that. So too, they're just vicariously reliving their youth through their children who are actually adults.
Yeah. I guess. Yeah.
I liked 90s music. There was a lot of it that was fun.
I did in the 90s.
Yeah, in the 90s it was fun. But now I listen to it and very little of it holds up sonically.
Yeah.
Like Janet Jackson had great production and her music had incredible bass. And it still has incredible bass and it still sounds really good, but it also sounds like it's 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's more
all of the synths sound dated, all of the drum beats and patterns and
the
snares, all of the sounds are dated because they got overused by the music industry.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, because you can buy, like, once
a lot of the
musicians
synthesizers
started
back
selling,
then didn't know how to. Those things were so hard to program.
Right, but what I was about to say is once they started selling their sound packs, like when you could buy Swiss Beats sound pack.
Oh yeah.
And be like, oh, I'm gonna use Swiss Beats' horn sound or some shit. It's like, now anybody can sound like anybody. It got really muddy then, and then especially with the dubstep people, like
the people who were the preset synthesists.
Yeah, it was a matter of, oh, I want to sound like Skrillex, or I want to sound like Casper, I want to sound like this person. So then you just set your bass or whatever tone you're trying to copy from them, and then build a song that just basically rips off their sound banks. And it was like, nobody listening gave a fuck who made it. It's like, oh, this sounds like a Skrillex song. Maybe it is Skrillex.
Oh man,
I'll listen to it.
I wish I had our playlist in front of me, but I think it's in like Bass Track or Palladium Temple. There was like 2 tracks that sounded like they were made with, like, one producer went in and made something and just like left the machine running, and then the next group came in and they just used what was already there to make a different song with the exact same sounds. But the 2 songs, like, but they blended together perfectly, and realistically, they probably just used the same sound sets.
Yeah, I was gonna say they were from the same record label.
Yeah.
So I bet they did. I'm sure they were using the exact same equipment.
They just didn't change a damn thing. They just left it there. Like, guys, this sounded great last night. See if you can make something with it.
Yep, it just sounds like the exact same song with like
a different verse. A different melody, different chorus, different verse. but sonically they're nearly identical, and then they blend perfectly together.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that is a good or bad thing. So that's where I do see that.
I think that's a happy accident.
No, I mean we did that. I definitely do that shit on purpose.
Yeah, we were very intentional about that. So it was
like in the sense of what I'm saying is, I don't know if that's good for music production when people can just go by the sound of somebody else, and then the audience is not discerning enough to know what just happened. That's why we end up with like a lot of shit copies.
Well, it's, no matter how good somebody is, they can't just go buy Charlie Parker's saxophone and buy the same kind of reeds that he used and file them down the same way, or chew on them, or whatever he did, do a bunch of heroin and then chew on them, and play like Charlie Parker. That just doesn't happen. You can't do a bunch of heroin and pick up Coltrane's saxophone and play like Coltrane. You can't do that with Miles' trumpet. You just can't do that with other people's instruments. And so this new technological wonderland that we've got, where it's now possible to wield the same sounds as your favorite inspiration, it kind of muddies the water. I don't know what I know what like BT, I know what his music sounds like because he's a synthesist and he programs patches and puts them together to create really complex soundscapes. But I don't think that every electronic musician out there is taking synthesis to that level, or even getting into like.
But does it matter? And this is where,
it doesn't matter. That's the thing. That's the other thing. But my point is, like, I know when I hear a BT production because it has these sonic touches that are very distinctly his. But now when I listen to drum and bass or techno music or a lot of electronic music, where it's trying to be music more than underground electronic music, we're trying to be more mainstream. That stuff, I can't tell one person from the other. I mean, I can kind of identify one singer from another in a style, but it's like people don't actually have a unique voice anymore, and so it's hard to tell who is who. But I know what Stevie Ray Vaughan sounds like. I know the difference between Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix in an instant. And I know when I hear Eddie Van Halen play, like, in an instant. But I can't say the same about, contemporary musicians anymore.
Right. I mean, but even in that light, like, does that actually matter? You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of where
probably
if
not.
It's good. Doesn't. This is where I
like Eddie's performance of a song, and I might like somebody else's performance of that song too. That's fine.
So this is
They're
where
different.
I guess I'm coming at it from, like, okay, looking at it, I know the difference between Qbert and DJ Shadow when listening to any other DJs.
Oh yeah, well, they've got very distinct technical styles.
Does that make them danceable?
Not necessarily.
I mean,
so I don't think. Kind of actually, no. In all of the times I've seen DJ Shadow and the 2 times that I've seen Qbert, everyone stands still and they become what is it? Train spotters.
So what I'm getting at is where you get these like unique identities in sound, it doesn't even like translate into a moving dance floor. Like,
I don't know. There's some the Van Halen's cover of what is it? It's like super synth driven. It's very danceable, but it still sounds like Van Halen. But that's a long time ago. They were like.
But does it, like, this is what I'm looking at? Like, when you see people like Van Halen start to do synth work and shit, it's like, is that Van Halen? Or is that Van Halen trying to sound like Aphex Twin? Or trying to you know what I'm saying?
No, I'm pretty sure it's Eddie Van Halen just wanting to play the synthesizer, not wanting to play the guitar. I think he was tired of the guitar.
I mean, I could buy that if it was Pink Floyd.
No, man, there's a lot of synthesizer stuff going on in like everything in Van Halen's music. It's really subtle though. Like he doesn't put
that's my point. It's mostly subtle, and that's what I'm saying. Like, if Van Halen starts to shift towards a heavy synth sound, like, it may have their tinge, but then that's where I'm like, that's no longer a Van, like, it's an
Eddie Van Halen composition at that point.
Yeah, but it's like
It's not a Van Halen as the sound of Van Halen.
It's not a Van exactly.
Yeah.
It's not a Van Halen sound, and this is kind of where it's the same shit with if if Jimi Hendrix wrote a composition for an orchestra, it would sound like him, but if there were no fucking delay pedals or anything that was like
Guitar
distorting the sound
acrobatics.
involved, it would not be the Jimi Hendrix sound. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this is kind of, it wouldn't even have to be guitar acrobatics. It would be like the heavy use of distortion, the heavy use of delay, the heavy use of echo. Those things are Jimi Hendrix sound. It doesn't have to necessarily be guitar oriented. And that's where I'm like, I can see there are things that certain artists do that are then their sound, which can then be abstracted from a specific instrument. And that's what, like, not to say that again, the Van Halen sound isn't restrict, like you don't have to restrict it only to guitars. It's just
I
more
think
so.
the Van Halen sound is like actually much more driving than we give it credit for.
Mhm.
I think that the actual sound of Van Halen is like something that dance music achieves during like peak rave.
Yeah.
It's like that kind of energy. But it's weird to me. It's like, it's still like when I hear Van Halen, I just know that's what it is. Maybe it's because I've listened to a lot of it and I can't like divorce the two or one from the other.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I feel like Van Halen is trying.
But I don't
like,
think Van Halen. No, Van Halen. There are like 3 or 4 songs where Van Halen is not it's not a guitar song, but it still sounds like Van Halen.
Okay, here I'm gonna describe the Van Halen sound to you. The Van Halen sound is an 80s strip club that thinks it's classy, but is kind of slutty, but you'd still go home with it.
Yeah, because it has shrimp
that's the Van
cocktail
Halen
and
sound.
steaks.
Exactly, and it's not gonna make you puke. The shrimp cocktail is not gonna make you puke,
And the steaks are
You'll
actually
eat
pretty
it.
good.
Exactly. So that's the Van Halen sound, and that's where I'm like, say I'm wrong. You can't. That's the Van Halen sound, and that's kind of where I'm like,
There's a lot of whiskey
You know,
smell too.
there's a very strong whiskey smell, possibly some tequila. That's the Van Halen sound. It smells like whiskey
And ashtrays.
and ashtrays. Yeah, because you're still allowed to smoke inside.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
The Van Halen sound is you're still allowed to smoke inside. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's,
and that's
you're
kind
still
of
allowed
like,
to smoke inside. The steaks are good. The shrimp cocktail won't make you sick.
you might have a kid at home that's like
That's
under
not
the age
yours.
of 14. No, that's yours, but it doesn't have a babysitter.
Oh,
It's in front of the TV. You just need to get out and have a night on the town. But it's okay because that's still a latchkey kid and is not actually in danger yet. That kid is going to be okay because you live in a different world.
oh man. Yeah.
That's the Van Halen sound. So, and that's where, you know, unless it evokes those feelings, it's not Van Halen.
Well, I'm trying to think if like Van Halen ever did a ballad like that sounded like it was actually a Van Halen song.
Count Drop Dead Legs as a ballad.
No.
Hot for Teacher, is that ballad material?
I mean, I was just like, I mean, Jamie's Crying is kind of ballad material, but it's not a ballad. And Ain't Talking About Love could have been a ballad, but it's definitely not a ballad. Dance the Night Away could have been a ballad, but it's definitely not. None of their songs are ballads. They're all like fun songs. Maybe I just skipped over them because they sucked. No, I don't think they had any real slow. I don't think Eddie knows how to write slow music or I don't think he knew how. I think he knew how to make music that sounded like you're driving 20 miles an hour over the speed limit anywhere you were. Even at a stop sign, you sounded like you were going 20 miles an hour over.
Yeah.
Fast enough to be dangerous, but not too fast.
Yeah. Jump.
I mean, that's kind of a slow Van Halen song. You know, I think that's the thing. Like, rock and roll has energy. Music's supposed to have some energy, and there's some all right. Like, I enjoy some Pink Floyd songs that are kind of slow, but I don't listen to Pink Floyd all the time because it's like real slow. I feel like I'm walking through water or the whole time, and it's.
Well, have you watched any of their? I think it's like live at. Is it Vesuvius?
Oh, Pompeii.
Pompeii, yeah.
Yeah, I've watched their concert footage. They're amazing. I mean, they're probably one of the best bands to ever exist.
Because live at Pompeii, I feel like when you see it performed, it gives it that visual context where you don't even have to be like on acid or anything to understand it.
Well, I don't think drugs are necessary for Pink Floyd's music. Like,
no.
We want to pretend that it's all psychedelic and really surreal and all this shit, but the visual communication, or the way that they use words to communicate visual ideas and tell and explore narrative, they were just writing really brilliant and complex songs and composing really, creating really, really strong compositions. But yeah, walking through water, that's how I feel like when I'm listening to their music. It's like everything slows down. They do a good job at that.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the few, that's like the only band that I can think of where they make me feel like time is slowing down and I don't mind.
Well, it's stretching time in a different way, but drum and bass does it in a like almost at the exact opposite of the scale.
By going faster.
Yeah.
We are going to increase the speed of time to make you feel like it's going slower.
Yeah, because again, it's where you're like, the way they count drum and bass is usually on the hi-hat.
Yeah.
So you end up getting these like 180 beat per minute, 176 beat per minute instead of like 92 where hip hop is. But
I've always felt like it's one of the things I always liked about drum and bass is it seemed that a lot of the time-based effects and even some of the time-based sequencing stuff, that stuff all seemed like it was happening at like halftime relative to the normal speed, or even a quarter time relative to the normal tempo, the actual tempo. And so there might be a halftime feel throughout, but some things just felt like they were evolving even slower.
Yeah,
I always thought that was really clever.
But that's where if you like actually then pursue that beat pattern, that's where drum step kind of comes in.
Yeah.
And that's like, drum step is not really danceable, but it sounds cool.
I like drum step as a bridge between drum and bass and dubstep.
Yeah, that's how I kind of use it.
A drum step track is really cool in that you can take it at whatever speed it is that you started getting into it with the drum and bass and just start slowing it down until you get to dubstep tempo. And then the drop happens and then dubstep. It's almost like the genre. It's almost like Pendulum knew that somebody was going to need a bridge between the two. I don't actually think that Pendulum invented drum step, but they created a lot of music that sounds a lot like what drum step became or is.
Yeah, I was making drum step before it had a proper name.
Yeah,
so I know other people were doing it too for sure. Yeah, because before stuff has a name, there's no real formula to it.
Yeah.
So you're in this.
You can still experiment.
Yeah, and it's really funny how I enjoy those experimental sonic places as a musician, but they're so rare and few and few and far between that it's like you can't really have those like new types of musics being created or new genres being created very often.
You can't.
Like dubstep got created in the early 2000s, you know, that doesn't happen often. Or trap music.
You can't just like plan to go explore and find something. You can go off in a direction and you might find something. I've always found it very difficult to create that headspace consistently, where you can just create something new. It's always iterative, or it's always a reflection or a mimicry or imitation of something else. Especially with sampling, because then you end up starting with somebody else's like sonic palette. But it's really difficult to get away from that, because nearly everything is made with computers now. So even if you do start with like a even if somebody wants to go to the great lengths of creating entirely brand new synthesized drum sounds, which takes a long fucking time, or even if you start out with a hardware drum machine that is also a synthesizer that you can modify its sounds, at some point it's still working within a sequence and a programming paradigm that exists and has been cooked up by somebody.
Well, and then
because nobody just knows how to use a synthesizer or a drum machine. You have to read the instructions.
Yeah, for sure. But then you realize like a lot of your favorite sounds aren't even necessarily the
thing that people think it is.
Yeah, like Dr. Dre's snare has a lot of clap in it.
Yep.
Where you're like, oh shit, that's what makes that snare pop like that. And then
so interesting story about that. Dr. Dre and George Clinton, I believe, both had this synthesizer called the Clap Cushion synthesizer, which is a synthesizer module that all it does is clap. And I've got active searches for these things on eBay and on Reverb, because if one ever comes up again, I was foolish and I didn't buy it. It was only like $115, but it was one of those like that's all it does. It only claps. Like, yeah, but you can make it sound like, you know, any size hands you want, or, you know, big meaty palms, or bony. You know, it has all these knobs that allow you to dial in the clap sound. But apparently that's like a critical instrument to his sound. They didn't make very many of them. Watch the price of these synthesizers just skyrocket now. Another interesting thing about old synthesizers that I've always, you know, some of them are really hard to program, like excruciatingly hard to program. And then, you know, so you end up trying to make things with, you know, the built-in sound. And then you find out that a lot of the built-in sound isn't even close to the sound that you hear in a song. And of course it can't be, because these things are, you know, processed and run through all sorts of processing just to get it to be the sound. And there are so many times that I've played with like a drum machine that just didn't quite live up to expectations, like 808 clones that don't sound anything like they do on a recording, because, you know, I'm not running it through a compressor, and I'm not doing any kind of other additional, or any kind of EQing, or any kind of processing for that matter. And then it reminds me, like, nothing actually sounds the way we think it does. Like, my voice doesn't actually sound the way that it sounds during broadcast in real life. We try to keep things, you know, within a realm of kind of realistic, but there's a lot of dynamics processing that goes on to make our voices sound the way they do. And a lot of that is to make things listenable on headphones or smaller speakers and laptop speakers, because we can't assume that anyone's listening on some giant stereo system.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of, like, even the sound of like Van Halen, that's so heavily processed that, and I know what kind of amplifiers he used, and I've played Van Halen or EVH guitars, and they play fantastically. They should for $3,000, And the amplifiers are like any other world-class tube amp. They sound like, they sound amazing. But the sound of a guitar, a raw electric guitar through an amplifier in a room, is so far away from what a guitar sounds like in a recording. I don't think, I know that most people have no idea just how much a guitar is processed between like recording it and the time they get to hear it on their playback system of choice. Because I still learn about new techniques that are being used to make guitar sound more realistic. And they say realistic with big air quotes because it's, physics. You can't move that much air with tiny speakers, even no matter how close you get to them. You just can't. I think that's the same thing that happens with like electronic music. These things are made on big systems to sound a certain way, and getting it to translate to a small playback system is just, that's been the thing that's prevented a lot of really good electronic music from finding its own audience, because unless you're at the rave, it'll never sound like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people have been chasing sounds that, you can almost only get certain sounds by being in the space in which you experienced it that one time, and then you'll never be able to reproduce it unless you're in front of that same speaker setup.
Yeah. Like just with electric guitars, a lot of those amazing guitar sounds happen with really big amplifiers in front of giant speaker stacks, cranked up, like pushing a lot of air. Like, 8 12-inch speakers worth of air is a lot of air moving all at once.
Oh yeah. And even down to how it's going to sound in an open air auditorium versus like an arena, like an enclosed arena or something. Like some of those Deer Creek events, like the further out you get, it just starts to sound terrible unless you get, at the right spot where the apex of the speaker waves are. And it's like, a lot of times people are attending stuff for a music event and then getting shitty music experience because they're not in a building or an area that's actually equipped to handle certain kinds of music.
Yeah. Although there have been times when I've been at like at raves where the building itself was long enough that there was a big delay between the front and the back of the room, and so there was this weird sweet spot where you could hear the delay from the back of the room and the principal sound, the primary source of the sound. And I always thought that was really cool. And it turns out that like big festivals, they get around this by doing like time delay. So the sound at the stage and the sound at the mains across the entire field of the audience, they're not the same. There's like an actual delay between the stage and the mains. And then like the second line of speakers or third line, however many lines of speakers, depending on how big the festival is, like they've got to keep all that stuff synchronized so that the people in the back and the people in the front are listening to the same thing. So they're not even actually listening to the band. They're watching the band and listening to a delay of the music.
Yep.
That's crazy. That stuff blows my mind, actually, because I mean, that's just how much processing there is in between the stage and the audience. There's an actual delay.
It's just a matter of like, then you can start to see the speed at which sound travels. Like, I don't know.
It's like 1,133 feet per second.
Well, I'm saying like there's a visual threshold at which if you get far enough away from someone hitting a baseball, there's like a time delay between when they hit it and when the sound gets to you.
Yeah.
So that's where I mean, like, I think there are not many times when we can visualize the speed of sound, but the delay between someone performing at the front of an auditorium or venue compared to the sound wave that is projected from the front versus the one that's projected from the back, and how they have to be adjusted as such is like a perfect example of that speed.
Absolutely. No, that's a really good example, actually. I was trying to think of like anything else, like a golf club and a golf ball.
Yeah, because I think
that is a similar, like you can see a person swing and then you hear the pain of the club face against the ball.
Yeah. But yeah, you know, not many people are that close to someone swinging a golf club, but far enough away to have that. Whereas like a baseball mound or diamond has many more visual perspectives where from which someone could be like walking by a baseball field and happen to see it. Because that's where that I remember the first time seeing that phenomenon happening, where I'm like, I just sat there and watched it for a minute because I'm like, this is fucking weird.
Like, wait a second. Did I see that right? Did that just happen?
Well, because I was close enough as to where the sound did not lose that much, like force. So it was still like just as loud as if you heard him hit it, but it's a slightly visual delayed. And that's what I'm like, this is, you know, your first time you see it in real life, your brain just has to process it. What the fuck is going on?
So the speed of light in feet is, good golly, it's so fast. It is 983,571,056.43 feet per second, and sound is like 1,133 feet per second.
Yeah,
it's that I think that illustrates your point perfectly. Is that we're going to see this thing happen actually a lot faster than our ears are going to get the information, and it doesn't take that much of a distance. Like, it really doesn't. It just has to be enough to have the latency be enough to be perceivable as a delay and not as just like as inherent latency.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like a specific number of feet. Well, I guess it would depend on the humidity and everything.
Oh yeah,
the heat,
relative temperature, humidity, wind, because that's all going to affect things. Because you're trying to hear pressure changes, rapid pressure changes, and those have to travel. That stuff's also pretty crazy. That's why I really enjoy these like radio telescope information that we get, like kind of imagery. Is like because they can map big swaths of space and then turn that into like some kind of visual representation that's meaningful. And then of course we have to recognize these points of light are millennia upon millennia away from us, entire ages away from us, millions of years away from us. If a sound could be travel that far, we would hear it like. Well, we wouldn't hear it. Somebody would hear it so far into the future. Afterwards, they wouldn't know it. It wouldn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah.
Fortunately,
the whole space-time continuum thing.
Huh.
Being beholden to those laws of physics.
So radio waves travel at approximately 100 or 200,000 miles or miles per second or slower, which means that any radio waves that we're getting now are from 200,000 years ago, if it was sent by some species or form of life that has technology to communicate using radio. It's already been 200,000 years.
So they're either gone or super advanced.
Yeah.
Yeah. Damn physics and how,
That means that if anyone actually does hear or watch hear our radio or watch our TV shows or listen to our attempts to communicate outside with extraterrestrial life, they're never going to be able to talk to that person. They're going to reply like, I got your message. Where are you?
Our first frequencies that we were putting out weren't strong enough, I don't think, to make it out of our solar system.
Oh yeah.
And then it was like
they had to reprogram Voyager to get it to send information back through the heliopause. They just brought it back online, I think, or just restored communication with Voyager. So we can barely communicate with our two most distant objects, research vessels.
Yeah, there's like a there's going to be a marked point where I think it was like early 2000s where the first radio waves were just strong enough to have made it past the heliopause, if they would have been strong enough, in the sense of they take so long to travel there that they just would have been getting there. And then as we learned,
there's so much noise out there.
Yeah, and there's a lot more gravitation at the heliopause than we anticipated. So it's not necessarily likely that the radio waves actually escaped the heliopause.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't have had enough energy behind them. So this is like you're saying, we just now reestablished contact with Voyager. So
it's man, I really hope that all these rich folk who want to go into space. I think some 18-year-old went into space with Bezos.
Yeah.
So he's like the youngest person to go into space. I hope these really rich people are proud of themselves for this.
I mean, and technically they didn't even go into space.
Yeah, I know. They went into they didn't even go into a low orbit.
Nope.
They just got to like the high orbit or a high altitude.
Yep. So that's where, I mean, like, this notion of them going to space, someone was like, yeah, well, we don't even really, if they did not do a full orbit around the planet, should we even count it? Because again, it's like, yeah, you went on a really high flight. you didn't
altitude
go to space. That if that's the bar for quote unquote going to space, then it's just moving the bar lower for billionaires now.
That's just a more extreme version of that Boeing gravity or weightlessness simulator plane.
Yep. Huh. Yep.
I mean, what could really go wrong if we send a bunch of untrained rich people into space? I feel like I just created no, I didn't create anything. I just tapped into an HBO miniseries called Avenue 5. It's about a space cruise ship where shit happens and goes horribly awry. Like horribly. At one point there's like a ring of shit that's like circling the ship because of the gravitational pull of the ship. I highly recommend it. It's definitely worth not watching on HBO, but
Directed by Ridley Scott.
Bless Ridley Scott for giving us a bunch of religious zealots in space.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think that's
like the most dystopian future that I think we've seen yet. I'm serious, man. Like,
Yeah.
religious zealots in space persecuting people on another planet. That's as like imperialist as it gets. What a fantastic commentary.
Yeah. And a philosophically Christian nation in charge of a space program. Is that where that ends up? Kind of, probably, right?
Yep.
So I see where he's going with that.
Yeah.
I don't know if enough other people do.
I mean, I don't think it's that thinly veiled.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
I think the story is a little too complicated for most people to get into it without like basically being told the story and be like, oh, I should probably watch this. Because at like the end of that first season, it gets really weird. Mm-hmm. Like so weird that I had to watch like the middle 3 episodes again to make sure that I paid attention to everything so that I understood what happened. And that's generally that's like a mixed bag of, well, that's kind of cool. Now I don't understand what's going on. I have a bunch of questions, and I want those questions to at least lead the story somewhere else. But then at the same time, it's also like, holy shit, I have so many questions right now. What happened to this story? And I really just can't wait for season 2. I'm really looking forward to it. I know there were a lot of criticisms about it, but I think he's managed to give us like a real like big budget movie look in a series. He gave us one of his like epic movies doled out in however many episodes, and it looks fantastic. And so it's like it's they're doing it, and Disney's doing it with like Loki and Captain or Winter Soldier, Falcon. Like they're showing us that they can give us TV shows that have every bit of production that they put into their movies.
I think what's happening is the
Star Trek is the same way.
Well, it's like the framing. So it's like, now people have widescreen televisions and big screens, so they're doing TV backgrounds and framing in the same style as film.
Yeah.
So now we're not just getting talking head TV shows, and we're getting visual information that's meant for a big screen, which is not what TV shows were doing before. Yeah. So now that they've taken that approach, it's like, if you blow up WandaVision, the visual information will work on a big screen because it's not all talking head shit, but the pacing's for TV.
Yeah.
It's for different episodes, but as far as the visual information goes, they're presenting large screen information on TV shows now.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think it's just strictly because of the
availability of giant monitors.
The giant monitors, but also the TV proportion.
Yeah.
Because it's like, the screen rate, the aspect ratio on old TVs was completely different, which is why they had to do letterbox versions of movies to then fit the TV's aspect ratio. There's so much to aspect ratios that dictated how films and television were shot for so long that now have been not necessarily thrown out the window, but aren't as much
now
technological influence.
Now you use those old-timey TV screen ratios when you want to date your material so that it's so it looks appropriate when referencing old. You can't see my air quotes, but old content when they have to fabricate some. Oh, this is footage from a security cam when they're doing some like 80s period piece. And I don't mean 1880s. They didn't have security cameras back then. They could have, but they didn't. Can you imagine security cameras back in the 1880s? It'd be like some dude with like a roll of film who'd have to take a picture every 10 minutes, sitting up on top of a street lamp. Like, hey, Joe, what are you doing up there? He's like, oh man, I got a job as a security camera. Like, oh yeah, how's that working? Hold on, let me take your picture.
flash goes off every 10 minutes. The flash bulb
all over the city. Yeah, that would have been bad. But that's actually like a kind of a good job, because it sounds like a decent job, because you'd be sitting around working with a camera all day, but in reality it's at night, and it's when the the dangerous elements of society are running free. And if people were willing to bust out street lamps, imagine what they would do to a guy holding a camera sitting on top of a street lamp. Oh man. Yeah, we just created the worst steampunk job imaginable, being the security camera.
Yeah, it's crazy you don't see that shit in actual steampunk movies or games or whatever. I thought this was steampunk.
Where's the guy sitting on top of the street lamp with the camera?
Yeah, I don't know, man. And this is where, back to the nature conversation.
Oh yeah.
I just don't understand what I asked someone who's seemingly into cyberpunk, is this like, are they trying to get towards this aesthetic, or is this they understand this is like a dystopia, right? Like, when people are into cyberpunk fiction, like, they don't want that future, right? And it seems like a lot of them do want it, which is where I think there's this.
Well, I think that I think cyberpunk is a representation of our worst fears of technology. Like, I mean,
for some of us, but it sounds like, in my experience, some of the people, the way that cyberpunk is romanticized, they want it. Like,
I mean, don't get me wrong. If I could get cybernetic implants that would give me perfect vision with like zoom lenses and shit, I would consider it. But I don't actually want implants.
I mean, but they could get hacked.
Yeah, I know.
So that's where I'm like, would you? Like, your eyes can't get hacked right now. Your eyes can be deceived. Mm. But you're talking about a full-on, like, somebody could come in and hack your shit.
Yep.
Oh, at that point, like, the whole reason it's meant to be dystopian is because
you don't want
type
those
of
things.
Situation. Yeah, exactly.
No, I know.
So
last winter,
cyber implants sound cool at first until you like explore the hacking element.
Well, if there's
which
no
is what
hacking, it's
cyberpunk,
cool, but
right. But that's what Cyberpunk 2077 is all about. Is like how you can hack these junctions.
Well, even what was that? There's another game. It was like set in Chicago. Watch Dogs. That's a game that's full of hacking computer systems to get your goal accomplished.
Fun as fuck. I love that game.
That game's great because you can get assistance from people playing the companion game. There's like a companion like Android.
Yeah, they download it on their mobile phone.
Yeah, or your phone or iPhone or whatever, and you can initiate a hack from a phone, or you can send reinforcements or send stuff to people. Like, I thought that was a really, really well integrated. They did a really good job of integrating a third-party application into the larger game itself.
Well, the thing about Watch Dogs is you can play it that way or not. So I play it that way, which it's something completely different than when you use a gun or some shit. So when I'm playing Watch Dogs, I'm in a completely specific mindset, to the point that if I want to play a shoot 'em up game, I don't go to Watch Dogs, because then what's the point of them putting all that hacking shit in there? I'm just going to fucking run around and shoot a bunch of people. You know what I mean? So that's where I'm like, okay, Watch Dogs, when I play that, I'm specifically trying to like go in and look at it and be like, how can I hack this situation out and not like run and gun and approach it from the front, which is like when you get Metal Gear Solid and the Metal Gears, shit like that. They build those avenues, but then you can also run and gun if you want. But and I'm like, what's the point of picking this specific game if I'm just gonna do that? I could go play Gears of War or something stupid. Like, not stupid, it's mindless. Like, there are mindless violence games, and then there are games where you're like, how can I take this situation and approach it where I don't actually hurt anybody, and I'm like overloading all of the electrical sockets so that they come and shock themselves and get passed out instead of me shooting them. And it, like Watch Dogs, you can approach shit like that, or create create a distraction and just draw away the people that, instead of shooting them, you get them away from where you're trying to go so that they don't ever actually become like confrontational with you. So again, there are things about this type of game where they, or I don't know if you played Mirror's Edge.
I loved that game. That game was really hard.
You don't have to actually fight anybody.
No, you just got to be
You can just
clever.
keep running. You can fight somebody. Yeah, you can kick the shit out of people if you want.
Sometimes they kick the crap out of you, though.
I mean, but if you know what you're doing, you can just keep running and get away from them. And that's what I mean. Like, there are pathways in that game where, yeah, you can avoid death and you don't actually have to harm anyone. Every game does not give you a pathway out of violence. And there's games like Fallout is one of those, like, you don't have to be violent in every encounter in Fallout, I think.
Splinter Cell was like that. In fact, I think you did better in Splinter Cell if you didn't interact with anybody, because if you had to like engage somebody on one of the maps, you had to hide their body.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't have to kill them. You could just knock them out, but you had to hide their body so that nobody else would find them. And then once you did that, then the clock started ticking for the next time they checked in, or were supposed to check in. And then they didn't, like, check in, then they start sending tunes to come after you.
Mm-hmm.
And that game was more fun if you just went full stealth and hid. It became really, like, it was much more challenging. It was much more engaging too, because you don't have the option of running and gunning, because you have a pistol and you have, like, a disc that you're carrying to extract data. It was like the hardest parts of Metal Gear, basically, without the killing.
Yeah.
It made it so much harder, but it was really rewarding, because you don't always have to kill people in these games to win. That's a difficult concept for a game that is all set in a military martial environment.
100%. And especially, there's some Metal Gear games where they give you like just a dart gun to start off, and everybody else has Uzis and AKs.
No,
and
that's
all kinds
Splinter
of
Cell.
heavy weaponry, and
that's Splinter Cell, I think, or maybe that is a Metal Gear game.
I mean, I know a Metal Gear game does it for sure, because I like hated it at first. I fucking hated it. Because I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? How come I have to like duck and hide with my little fucking dart gun, and these guys got like bazookas and shit? And that's where I'm like, oh, because that's the point. But I was much younger and it didn't understand stealth. Like, you didn't understand stealth. Like when you go from what's it called? Rainbow Six, SOCOM, like all of these like coordinated military games where the point is to get as many kills as quick as possible, then going into stealth where you're like, you have to capture a hostage and try not to kill people. I guess they had some of those in
you can't even be seen.
Rainbow Six, but you could in Rainbow Six, if you had to like get a hostage and like rescue them, you were definitely killing people in the process. You were killing the other team or some shit. But where in these games, you're like, you can't kill anybody or else you fail. It's like a completely different mindset. And I think that approach is like, they're training a completely different type of player where, I'm not going to say one is more quote unquote noble than the other just because
no, they're
it's
different
not
applications.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't send a hammer into a room full of china that you need to glue back together. You need to send glue in, and you can't use a thing of super glue to pound nails. It's the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to reduce people to hammers or sticks of glue, but
I mean, but when they're sent in on operations and missions, that's what they become. They are tools to execute an action. And that's kind of where, these things are trying to show you, like, if your goal is to rescue a hostage, you can't just go in running and gunning, because by the time you fire your first shot, everybody's going to be alerted, and they're either going to execute the hostage or come after you full force. So that shit doesn't work. So I'm glad that they do have those types of games where they don't just allow you to just 100% do some dumb shit and still win. Like that would not be.
I think that's the lesson. Not all games mean that you have to do some dumb shit to win.
Engage.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.